"The bad man is coming," the little girl told the millionaire, and 30 minutes later there was a knock on the door and something terrible happened. Watch until the end. Comment and let me know what you thought of this story. Give it a rating from 0 to 10. I really want to know if you liked it, and please subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The rain hammered against the hunting cabin's windows like hailstones, turning the October afternoon into a deafening symphony that echoed through the Allegheny Mountains. Ethan Vance sat before the cold fireplace, staring at the dead embers as he clutched a half-empty bottle of whiskey. At 30, his dark hair was already showing premature streaks of grey, and his calloused hands trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from the weight of carrying the last name of a family that had built half the city's district and now couldn't even pay the basic bills for their construction company. The isolated property on the slopes of Blue Ridge Peak was the last refuge he had left. He had inherited the cabin from his German grandfather, an austere man who believed problems were solved with hard work and silence. Ethan had been trying to follow that example, hiding there for 3 weeks, fleeing the pitiful gazes of neighbors, the insistent creditors, and above all, his own shame. Vance Construction, which his father had built brick by brick over 40 years, was drowning in debt after a series of contracts that had seemed promising, but turned out to be financial traps. The sound of the storm was suddenly interrupted by desperate pounding on the solid wood door. Ethan jumped, knocking over the bottle, which rolled across the old floorboards. Who would be crazy enough to climb the mountain during a storm like this? The knocks repeated, more urgent, accompanied by a high, childish voice screaming something unintelligible through the wind. When he opened the door, Ethan felt the frigid mountain air invade the cabin along with a gust of rain. Before him stood a small girl, soaked to the bone, trembling violently. Her brown hair stuck to her wet face, and she held a bundle of rags against her chest that moved slightly. The child couldn't have been more than 4, but her large, dark eyes carried a sadness that seemed far too ancient for her age. "Please, sir," she said with a voice hoarse from crying, "the bad man is coming. He's going to take the baby." Ethan stood paralyzed for a few seconds, trying to process the surreal scene. The girl was holding what was clearly a baby, and both were wet, dirty, and visibly exhausted. Without a second thought, he stepped back from the door. "Get in, quick," he said, pulling the child inside the cabin. "You'll freeze to death out there." The girl stumbled in, her bare feet leaving muddy tracks on the floor. She kept murmuring about a bad man who would come for them while rocking the baby with mechanical movements that seemed automatic. Ethan rushed to get towels and blankets, his mind working frantically to understand what was happening. "What's your name?" he asked, kneeling to the girl's level and trying to dry her hair with a soft towel. "Maya," she answered, still shivering. "And this is Thomas. He's very little. He was born not long ago." Ethan looked at the baby in Maya's arms. The child was pale but breathing normally. From his size, he really did seem to be only a few weeks old. How had such a small girl managed to care for a baby? And where were their parents? "Maya, where are your parents? How did you get here?" The girl's eyes filled with tears again. "Mommy and Daddy went away a long time ago. Isabella took care of me, but the bad man took her away. He said I was too little to take care of the baby, but I know how. Isabella taught me." "Who's Isabella?" "My big sister. She's 16 and very pretty, but the bad man separated us. He said he was going to take Thomas to a good family, but Isabella cried a lot and told me to run away with the baby." Ethan felt a tightness in his chest. The story was confusing, but the child's desperation was real. He prepared warm milk in an improvised bottle and helped Maya feed the baby, watching how she held Thomas with experienced care. It was clear that despite her young age, she really knew how to care for the child. While Maya and Thomas rested near the fireplace he had lit, Ethan tried to piece together the fragments of the story. Children separated from a teenage sister, a newborn baby, someone trying to take the child from the girl. It sounded like a situation involving social services or something more sinister. The rain had subsided to a light drizzle when new knocks echoed at the door, this time firmer and more authoritative. Maya immediately jumped up, hugging the baby tightly against her chest. "It's him," she whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "It's the bad man. He found me." Ethan felt his blood run cold. He approached the door cautiously and asked who it was. "My name is Oscar Morgan. I'm a social worker from the county," a male voice answered from outside. "I'm looking for a child who ran away from a shelter this morning. Information indicates she might be on this property." Ethan looked at Maya, who was shaking her head desperately, tears streaming down her face. Something didn't add up. How had a social worker found out where they were so quickly? The cabin was in an isolated area, with no official address, known only to a few old-timers in the region. "Mr. Vance," Oscar continued, "I know you're going through difficulties, but hiding a child in an irregular situation can have serious legal consequences. The girl needs to return to the shelter, and the baby with her must be handed over to the proper authorities so he can be placed with a suitable family." The fact that Oscar knew his name confirmed Ethan's suspicions. Something was very wrong with this situation. He decided to buy time. "I don't know what you're talking about," he answered through the door. "There's no child here." "Mr. Vance, please don't make this more difficult than it has to be. We have evidence the girl came up the mountain in this direction. It's for her own good." Maya approached Ethan and whispered in his ear, "He's lying. I didn't run away from a shelter. I lived on the street with Isabella, and he showed up 3 months ago saying he was going to help us, but he separated us and took my sister. When the baby was born, Isabella managed to warn me that he was going to take Thomas too." Ethan knelt to the girl's level. "Maya, I need you to tell me everything you know about this man. Where did you last see your sister?" "In a big house with high walls, in the center of town. There was a sign that said Sterling on the gate. Isabella worked there, but she couldn't leave. She threw a piece of paper out the window, telling me where the baby was and to run away with him." The last name, Sterling, made Ethan's heart race. Carmen Sterling had been his father's business partner years ago, but they had broken off the partnership bitterly. It was too much of a coincidence to be mere chance. The knocking on the door started again, more insistent. Ethan made a decision that would change everything. He picked up Maya along with Thomas and whispered, "We're leaving through the back door, trust me." The cabin's back door creaked softly as Ethan opened it with extreme care, checking to see if anyone was watching the rear of the property. The rain had stopped, but the ground was still soaked and slippery. Maya held Thomas tightly against her chest, her eyes fixed on Ethan's face, waiting for instructions. The knocking on the front door grew more violent, accompanied by Oscar's irritated voice demanding he open up. "This way," Ethan whispered, guiding Maya through the dense vegetation surrounding the cabin. He knew every trail on this mountain since childhood, when he used to hunt with his grandfather on weekends. There was an old, abandoned tool shed about 200 yards away, hidden among the ancient pine trees. It would be a perfect hiding spot until he figured out what was really going on. As they moved silently through the woods, Ethan watched Maya with growing admiration. Despite being only 4, she didn't complain once about the difficult terrain, keeping the baby protected and following his instructions without question. There was a disturbing maturity in that child, as if life had already taught her that survival depended on silence and obedience. "In here," he said softly, pushing open the warped door of the tool shed. The place smelled of damp wood and rust, but it was dry and relatively clean. Ethan improvised a bed with some old burlap sacks and helped Maya settle down with Thomas. "Maya, I need you to tell me everything about your sister, Isabella. How did you end up on the street? And why did this Oscar man separate you? The girl rocked Thomas automatically as she organized her memories. Her eyes lost focus for a moment, as if accessing files stored somewhere deep in her mind. Mommy and Daddy went away when I was very little. Isabella said they got sick and went to live in heaven. Grandma Betty took care of us for a while, but she went to live in heaven last year too. The house where we lived was sold to pay for Grandma's things. Ethan felt his chest tighten. 2 orphaned children, with no family, thrown onto the street. The story was more common than he liked to admit, especially in a tourist town like Oakhaven, where social inequalities were hidden behind the colorful facade of the old-world-style buildings. And how did you survive on the street? Isabella is very smart. She found work cleaning shops downtown, and I'd watch her things in a square near the market. There was a lady who sold flowers, Miss Ingrid, who always gave me bread and milk. She spoke German, just like her grandpa. Maya paused, rocking Thomas, who had started to cry softly. Ethan prepared another bottle with the formula he had brought from the cabin, observing how the girl cared for the baby with precise, gentle movements. That's how we met Julian, she continued after giving Thomas the bottle. He always passed by the square in his big car, on his way to school. One day he stopped and talked to Isabella. She got all red and happy. Is Julian Thomas's father? Maya nodded gravely. He likes Isabella a lot, but his grandma won't let them be together. She's very mean and has a big house with servants. Julian told Isabella that his grandma hates poor people. The pieces began to fit together in Ethan's mind. A young man from a wealthy family getting involved with a girl from the streets, an unwanted pregnancy, a powerful grandmother wanting to hide the scandal, but it still didn't explain the connection to his family's failed construction company. Maya, you said you saw your sister in a house with a sign that said Sterling. How do you know it was there? Because I saw her through the window. After Thomas was born, she managed to throw a piece of paper to me when I passed by on the street. It said where she was and where she had hidden the baby. And where was the baby hidden? In a small house behind the church downtown. There was an old woman who took care of a lot of babies, but she didn't like them. She let them cry for a long time and didn't give them enough food. Ethan felt a chill. It sounded like some kind of illegal scheme involving babies. Maybe irregular adoptions or something worse, and Oscar was clearly involved, presenting himself as a social worker to legitimize his actions. How did you get Thomas from there? I know all the streets in town. I'm small and nobody really sees me. I waited for the old woman to go out to buy cigarettes and got in through the bathroom window. Thomas was in a wooden box with 2 other babies. They were hungry and very dirty. The simplicity with which Maya recounted the situation frightened Ethan. A 4-year-old child having to rescue a baby from a place where there was clear neglect. And she had succeeded, using her small size as an advantage to go unnoticed. Why did you come here, Maya? How did you know where my cabin was? The girl stopped rocking Thomas and looked at Ethan with those large, intelligent eyes. Because I know you. You used to work with the man who made Isabella sad. What do you mean? I used to see you at the big office near the square where we stayed. You always wore a blue suit and carried a brown briefcase. One day I heard the man talking on the phone about making your family lose everything. He laughed a lot when he said it. Ethan felt his blood run cold. What man? Do you remember his name? I don't know his name, but he always came to pick up Isabella in a black car. He was bald and wore small glasses. Isabella was afraid of him. The description perfectly matched Robert Shaw, an accountant who had worked for both Vance Construction and Carmen Sterling, the man who had convinced his father to sign those disastrous contracts that ruined the company. Ethan had always suspected something was wrong with those deals, but he had never been able to prove anything. Maya, you're very observant. Did you hear anything else about my family? I heard him saying that you had very good land and that when you lost everything, the rich woman would get the land. He said difficult words I didn't understand, but I remember everything. Ethan was impressed by the girl's memory. She seemed to record every detail of everything she saw and heard, like a small, unwitting detective who had witnessed the scheme that destroyed his family. "Is that why you came looking for me? Because you knew I was also being harmed?" "No," Maya answered, shaking her head. "I came because I heard Miss Ingrid saying you were a good man, that you always helped people before you got sad, and because I had nowhere else to go with Thomas." At that moment, the distant sound of an engine echoed through the forest. Ethan cautiously approached the tool shed's only window and peeked through the cracks in the wood. A dark car was slowly driving up the dirt road leading to the cabin, its headlights cutting through the gloom of the overcast afternoon. "They brought help," he muttered. "Maya, we need to get out of here." "Where are we going?" Ethan thought quickly. They couldn't go back to town. Oscar clearly had contacts who had helped track them here, but there was an option he was reluctant to consider: his Aunt Marlene, who lived on a small farm on the other side of the mountain. She had fought with his father years ago over family financial matters, but she might be his only alternative. "We're going to a place where you'll be safe," he said, picking up Maya along with Thomas. "But it's going to be a long walk. Can you make it?" "I can," she answered with determination. "Isabella always said I'm stronger than I look." As they prepared to leave the hideout, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about Maya's revelations. The girl had witnessed conversations that proved his suspicions about the construction company's bankruptcy, but more than that, she had become an unknowing witness to a much larger scheme involving illegal adoptions, exploitation of vulnerable youth, and corruption. The sound of the engine was closer now. Ethan carefully opened the back door of the tool shed and checked if the path was clear. The trail leading to his Aunt Marlene's property would be steep and difficult, especially carrying two children. But it was his best chance to keep them safe until he found out exactly what he was dealing with. "Let's go," he whispered, starting to climb the rocky slope. Behind them, the voices of Oscar and other men echoed through the forest, getting dangerously close to where they had been hiding. The climb up the slope of Blue Ridge Peak tested Ethan's physical limits in a way he hadn't experienced since his teenage years. Carrying Maya and Thomas up the steep trails while trying to keep his balance on the slippery rocks made his muscles protest with every step. The girl remained in absolute silence, holding the baby with extreme care, as if she instinctively understood that their lives depended on not making a sound. After nearly 2 grueling hours of walking, his Aunt Marlene's small wooden house finally appeared among the pine trees, its porch covered in the colorful begonias she obsessively cultivated. Ethan hesitated for a moment before knocking on the door, remembering the last conversation he'd had with his aunt 5 years ago when she had accused him of being as irresponsible as his father. Marlene Vance opened the door with an expression that quickly went from irritation to shock. At 62, she maintained the rigid posture typical of the German women of her generation, but her blue eyes softened when she saw her nephew holding a small child and a baby. "Ethan, what are you doing here with these children?" "Aunt Marlene, I need your help. It's an emergency." She ushered them inside quickly, her maternal instinct overriding any past resentment. The house was immaculately clean, smelled of cinnamon and strudel, and had that welcoming atmosphere Ethan remembered from his childhood. Marlene prepared warm milk for Maya and helped warm Thomas's bottle while carefully observing the 2 children. "Are they hurt?" she asked in a low voice, noticing Maya's pallor and the way the girl protected the baby. "Not physically," Ethan replied, "but they're running from a very dangerous situation. Marlene, I need you to trust me this time." His aunt studied her nephew's face for a long moment. There was something different about him, a determination she hadn't seen in years, since before all the financial problems that had destroyed the family. "Tell me everything," she said, sitting in the rocking chair that had belonged to her mother. Ethan recounted the events of the last few hours, omitting only the most violent details so as not to frighten Maya further. Marlene listened in silence, occasionally asking specific questions that demonstrated her sharp intellect. When he mentioned the name Carmen Sterling, she sat up straighter in her chair. "Carmen Sterling," she repeated slowly. "Ethan, there are things about that woman you don't know, things your father never told you." What do you mean?" Marlene glanced at Maya, who had fallen asleep on the sofa holding Thomas, and motioned for Ethan to follow her to the kitchen, where they could talk without waking the children. "Your father and Carmen were more than just business partners, Ethan. They had a relationship over 20 years ago, before he married your mother. When your father chose your mother, Carmen swore she would one day get her revenge. She waited patiently, building her own real estate empire, waiting for the right opportunity." Ethan felt as if the floor had disappeared from under his feet. "Why did no one ever tell me this?" "Because your father was ashamed. Carmen is a woman without scruples. She used intimate information he had shared about the family business to harm you years later. The contracts that destroyed the construction company were no coincidence, Ethan. It was revenge planned for decades." As he processed these revelations, Ethan heard Maya stirring in the living room. The girl had woken up and was humming a soft song to Thomas, who had started to cry. It was a simple melody, but there was something familiar about it that he couldn't place. "Maya," he called softly, returning to the living room. "What's that song?" "It's the song Isabella always sang to the babies when we lived on the street. She said she learned it from our mum before she went to live in heaven." Marlene approached, intrigued. When Maya repeated the melody, the older woman visibly paled. "My God," she whispered. "It's Haydn Russlein, a very old German folk song. My mother used to sing it to me when I was a child." "What does that mean?" Ethan asked. "It means the parents of these children had some connection to the German community concentration in town. Not just anyone knew this song, Ethan. It was passed down through specific families." Maya looked at the two adults with curiosity. "You know my song?" "We do, dear," Marlene said, kneeling beside the girl. "And this helps us understand better who you are." At that moment, the distant sound of engines echoed through the valley. Ethan ran to the window and saw flashlight beams moving through the mountain trails. Oscar and his men had managed to follow their tracks. "They've found us," he said, feeling panic rise in his chest. Marlene remained calm, demonstrating the typical practicality of someone who had raised 5 children alone after her husband went to live in heaven. "We have an advantage. I know these mountains better than anyone. There's a hiding place not even you know about, Ethan." She led them to the basement of the house, where there was a secret passage leading to a natural cave on the mountainside. The hideout had been used during World War II by German families who feared reprisals because of their ethnic origin. "You'll stay here until I get rid of these men," she said, lighting an oil lamp and leaving enough provisions for a few hours. "Marlene, it's dangerous. If they find out you're helping—" "Leave that to me, son. I haven't survived 70 years on this mountain to be intimidated by a few men in suits." After Marlene left, Ethan and Maya settled into the damp cave. The space was small but secure, with stone walls that muffled any sound from outside. Thomas slept peacefully, seemingly accustomed to the constant changes in environment. "Ethan," Maya said suddenly, "I remember more things about the bald man who made you sad." "What do you remember?" "He always carried a red notebook. One day I saw him show pictures to the rich woman. They were pictures of you and your daddy talking to other men in different places." Ethan tensed. "What kind of pictures?" pictures in restaurants, in front of banks, entering big buildings. The bald man said the pictures proved you were doing bad things with money. Ethan's mind worked frantically. Robert Shaw had systematically documented his family's movements, creating false evidence of irregularities that didn't exist. It was a much more elaborate scheme than he had imagined. "Maya, where did you see these pictures?" "In the rich woman's office. One day, Isabella took me there secretly because she was worried about me. I hid under the big desk while they talked." "And do you remember what else they said?" Maya closed her eyes, concentrating. Her ability to recall details was extraordinary, as if her mind worked like a camera that automatically recorded everything. "The rich woman said that when you lost everything, she was going to build a very tall building where your house used to be, and that she was going to make a lot of money selling apartments to German tourists." The plan was revealing itself in all its complexity. Carmen not only wanted to destroy the Vance family for personal revenge, but she also had specific financial goals related to the valuable land they owned in Oak Haven's historic downtown. Outside the cave, they heard distant voices and the sound of footsteps in the forest. Oscar and his men were systematically searching the entire area, using powerful flashlights to illuminate every corner of the woods. "They'll leave soon," Ethan whispered, more to reassure himself than to convince Maya. But the girl was staring intently at the cave entrance, her eyes shining with a disturbing intelligence. "They won't," she said calmly, "because they can't let Thomas live." "What do you mean?" "Thomas is proof that Julian likes Isabella. If he grows up, one day he'll want to meet his daddy, and that will shame the rich family forever." Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine. Maya, at only 4 years old, had understood something he himself was just beginning to grasp. This wasn't just a matter of irregular adoption or exploitation of vulnerable minors. It was about eliminating evidence of a scandal that could destroy the reputation of one of Oak Haven's most powerful families. The sound of voices gradually fading brought temporary relief. But Ethan knew it was only a matter of time before Oscar and his men returned with more resources. The cave that had seemed a safe haven now felt like a trap. Maya remained alert, her large eyes fixed on the entrance, like a small wild animal that had developed survival instincts far too sharp for her age. "Can we leave now?" she whispered, rocking Thomas, who was starting to stir. Ethan waited a few more minutes before venturing out. Night had completely fallen on the mountain, bringing with it a biting cold typical of October in the region. When they got back to the house, they found Marlene in the kitchen, preparing a potato soup that filled the room with a comforting homemade aroma. "They're gone," she said without looking up from the pot. "But they'll be back. That man who calls himself a social worker asked specifically about orphan German children. Said he had information that there was a girl with specific characteristics in the area." "Specific characteristics?" Ethan asked. "Brown hair, dark eyes, about 4 years old, and most importantly," Marlene paused, looking at Maya, "an exceptional memory." He knew about her ability to remember details. "Ethan, that's no coincidence." Maya approached the table where Marlene had left some old family photo albums. She flipped through the pages carefully, studying each image with that intense concentration that had already caught Ethan's attention. "This woman," she said suddenly, pointing to a black and white photo, "she looks like Isabella." Marlene came over to see the photo Maya had chosen. It was an image from 1952, showing a group of German immigrants, gang, arrived in Oak Haven. In the center was a young blonde woman of about 16 with delicate features and expressive eyes. "That's Greta Zimmerman," Marlene said slowly. "She came to America after the war. With practically nothing, she worked as a maid for several German families in town." "What happened to her?" "She married Klaus Sanders, a carpenter who had also immigrated. They had 2 daughters, but life was very hard. Klaus drank a lot, and Greta worked day and night to support the family." Ethan felt a connection forming. Sanders. Maya, what was your parents' last name? Sanders, she replied without hesitation. My daddy's name was Michael Sanders, and my mummy was Anna Sanders. Marlene looked at the photo again, then at Maya, and finally at Ethan. If Greta Zimmerman is their grandmother, that explains a lot. The Zimmerman family had a specific reputation in the German community. What kind of reputation? Greta had an extraordinary photographic memory. She could remember entire conversations, document numbers, details that other people forgot immediately. During the war, this ability saved her several times. She memorized important information without needing to write anything down. Maya kept looking at the photo, gently touching the face of the woman in the picture. Is she my Grandma Greta? My mommy's mommy? It seems so, dear, Marlene said gently. And you've inherited her gift. Ethan began to understand why Maya was so valuable to people like Carmen Sterling and Oscar Morgan. A child with a photographic memory who had spent months on the streets, observing and listening to important conversations, posed a significant threat to any illegal scheme. Marlene, I need to find a way to prove everything Maya has witnessed. But how can I do that without putting her in danger? Before Marlene could answer, Maya got up from her chair and walked to the kitchen window. Someone's coming, she said calmly. Ethan ran to the window but saw nothing in the darkness. Maya, are you sure? Yes, it's a woman. She's coming up the trail slowly, carrying a heavy bag. 5 minutes later, soft knocks echoed at the front door. Marlene went to answer, finding a young woman of about 16, thin and pale, with disheveled blonde hair and clothes that looked like they'd been worn for days. Please, the young woman said in a desperate voice, I'm looking for my little sister. Someone told me she might be here. Maya let out a cry of joy that woke Thomas. Isabella! Isabella! The two sisters hugged in the middle of the room, crying with relief and happiness. Isabella held Maya as if she would never let go, checking to see if she was hurt. When she saw Thomas in Marlene's arms, her eyes filled with tears again. How did you manage? She asked, taking the baby and kissing him repeatedly. I thought I'd lost you forever. Maya brought me here, Ethan said. She's very brave. Isabella looked at him with both gratitude and suspicion. Who are you? Why are you helping us? Ethan briefly explained the situation, omitting the more complex details about the connections between their families. Isabella listened in silence, automatically rocking Thomas. I ran away from Mrs. Sterling's house tonight, she said finally. She found out I had told Maya where Thomas was. She was going to lock me in the basement until she decided what to do with me. How did you escape? Julian helped me. He can't stand lying to everyone about being Thomas's father anymore. He said he wants to take responsibility, even if it means fighting with his family. Marlene prepared a bowl of soup for Isabella, who ate ravenously. It was clear she hadn't eaten properly in days. As she ate, she reported disturbing details about her life in the Sterling house. Mrs. Sterling made me work from 5 in the morning until midnight. She said I had to pay for the food and roof she gave me. But it wasn't just that. She made me listen to her conversations with other rich men in town and then made me repeat everything I'd heard. What kind of conversations? Ethan asked. About land, construction, fake documents. She was planning to buy several properties downtown for very low prices after the owners lost everything. Your name came up a lot in those conversations, Mr. Vance. And Oscar? How does he fit into all this? He's not a real social worker. He's just a man who works for Mrs. Sterling doing her dirty work. He has contacts with people who want to adopt babies without asking questions, babies who don't have proper papers. The silence that followed was heavy. Ethan understood they were dealing with something much more sinister than he had imagined. Carmen Sterling didn't just destroy families for personal revenge. She had created an entire network of exploitation that fed on the vulnerability of people like Isabella and Maya. "Isabella," Maya said suddenly, "tell them about the notebook." "What notebook?" Isabella asked, seeming reluctant. "The bald man's red notebook. You said you saw him writing things about all the families Mrs. Sterling wanted to hurt." Isabella looked nervously at Ethan. "I shouldn't have gone through his things, but one day he left the notebook on the kitchen table. It had lists of names, addresses, information about debts and financial problems of various people. Your family's name was in there, Mr. Vance, along with lots of notes." "What kind of notes?" "Dates of meetings, places your father used to go, names of people who did business with you. It was like he had been following your family for years, waiting for the right moment to act." Ethan felt a mix of anger and determination growing in his chest. He finally had concrete evidence that the construction company's bankruptcy had been orchestrated. But now he faced a dilemma: how to use this information without putting the 3 children in even greater danger. "We have to get out of here," he said. "If Oscar finds out Isabella ran away, he'll intensify the search. We can't stay on the mountain." "Where will we go?" Marlene asked. Ethan thought about their limited options. They needed a place where they could hide temporarily while they planned how to expose Carmen Sterling and her scheme. Then he remembered someone who could help them. "We're going to the city," he said. "I know someone who can help us. Someone Carmen Sterling won't suspect is on our side." The descent from the mountain in the early morning was a tense and silent journey. Marlene had lent them her old blue Ford pickup, a truck that knew every curve of the winding road connecting the mountains to downtown Oakhaven. Ethan drove with extreme care, avoiding the high beams that could attract attention, while Isabella and Maya slept in the back seat with Thomas between them. The destination Ethan had in mind was the residence of Dr. Frederick Wagner, a retired 70-year-old lawyer who had been a close friend of his grandfather. Wagner was known in the German community for his unshakable integrity and for having helped numerous immigrant families over the decades. More importantly, he had been the lawyer who mediated the split between his father and Carmen Sterling years ago, knowing details of the relationship that could be crucial. Wagner's house was in the Villa Itupava neighborhood, a quiet street lined with half-timbered houses, typical of the German settlement. It was almost 5 in the morning when Ethan parked the truck in front of the carved wooden gate. The house lights were off, but he knew the old lawyer had a habit of waking up early to tend to his garden. "Stay in the truck," he said quietly to the girls. "I'll talk to him first." Dr. Wagner answered the door wearing a wool robe and slippers, his white hair disheveled from sleep. When he recognized Ethan, his expression shifted from irritation to concern. "Ethan, what happened? It's 5 in the morning." "Dr. Wagner, I urgently need your help. It's about Carmen Sterling and some children who are in danger." The lawyer led him into the spacious living room, decorated with antique furniture and photographs of old Germany. As Ethan quickly explained the situation, Wagner sat up straight in his armchair, his posture shifting to the professional mode that had characterized his career. "Bring the children inside," he said. "If half of what you're telling me is true, they can't stay exposed on the street." When Isabella and Maya entered the house, Wagner observed them attentively. There was something in his gaze that suggested recognition, as if he were trying to fit together pieces of an old puzzle. "Your last name is Sanders?" he asked Isabella gently. "Yes, sir. Isabella and Maya Sanders." Wagner stood up and walked to a tall bookshelf, pulling out a worn leather folder. "Girls, I believe I knew your parents, Michael and Anna Sanders, correct?" Isabella's eyes filled with tears. "You knew our parents?" "I did. I helped them with some legal documents about 7 years ago. Your father was trying to regularize the ownership of a small house they had inherited from Anna's mother, Greta Zimmerman. Ethan stepped closer, intrigued. What kind of property? A small house in the historic downtown on 15th of November Street. Nothing too valuable at the time, but Michael was worried because some people had shown interest in buying it for a very low price. He suspected something was wrong. And what happened? Wagner opened the folder and took out some yellow documents. Michael came to see me because he found out someone had forged documents trying to prove the property had unpaid tax debts. We managed to prove it was fraud, but shortly after, he and Anna had that terrible accident. Maya approached the table where Wagner had spread out the documents. Her eyes scanned the pages with that characteristic intense concentration. "This name," she said, pointing to a signature in the corner of one of the papers. "I've seen it before." Wagner followed the girl's small finger. "Robert Shaw. He was the accountant who tried to defraud your parents' property documents." "He's the bald man," Maya exclaimed. "The one who worked with Mr. Ethan and the rich woman." The pieces began to fall into place in Ethan's mind. Robert Shaw hadn't just destroyed Vance Construction. He had spent years identifying valuable properties in the historic downtown and orchestrating schemes for Carmen Sterling to acquire them at rock-bottom prices. "Dr. Wagner," Ethan said urgently, "where is this house that belonged to the girl's parents now?" Wagner consulted the documents. "According to what I have here, after Michael and Anna's passing, the property should have gone to the minor daughters. But there was a court case alleging child abandonment, and the house was sold at auction to settle supposed debts." "Who bought it?" "A company called Blue Ridge Investments, LLC. Isabella sniffled, wiping away tears. "I've never heard that name." "I have," Ethan said grimly. "It's one of Carmen Sterling's shell companies. She used the same kind of scheme to take our properties." Wagner stood up and began pacing the room, as he did when developing a complex legal strategy. "Ethan, if we can prove there was a systematic conspiracy to forge documents and force illegal sales, we can not only recover the properties, but also expose the entire network." "How?" "We need evidence. Documents, witnesses, proof that Robert Shaw and Carmen Sterling worked together on multiple cases." Maya approached Wagner, tugging on the hem of his robe. "I know where there are more papers like these." "Where, dear?" "In the rich woman's house. There's an office upstairs with lots of folders full of papers like these. I saw it when I went to get Isabella once." Wagner looked at Ethan meaningfully. "A child can't serve as a primary witness in a case like this, but if she could guide us to where this evidence is—" "No," Ethan said firmly. "I'm not putting these children in danger again." "Ethan," Isabella interrupted, "I know the house well. I worked there for months. I know exactly where Mrs. Sterling keeps the important papers, and I know everyone's routine. It's too risky." "More risky than running forever?" she asked. "Mr. Vance, I want this woman to pay for what she did to our family. She destroyed our parents, threw us on the street, and tried to separate us forever. I know how to get in and out of the house without being seen." Wagner studied the determined expressions of the two girls. "There is an alternative. We could try to get a search warrant, but that would take weeks and give Carmen time to destroy all the evidence." At that moment, the sound of a car slowing down on the street made everyone freeze. Ethan cautiously approached the window and saw a black sedan parking across the street. Two men got out of the vehicle and began observing the houses in the neighborhood. "They've found us," he whispered. Wagner reacted with surprising calm. "Go out the back door. There's a passage that leads directly to the neighbor's yard. Mrs. Gertrude has been my friend for 50 years. She won't ask questions." As they prepared for another escape, Maya held Ethan's hand. "I know another place we can hide. A place the rich woman will never look." "Where?" In the church. Pastor Heinrich always let us sleep in the hall when it was too cold on the street. He's very kind. Wagner nodded approvingly. St. Paul's Church, downtown. Heinrich Müller is a man of his word. If he offered you shelter before, he will again. As they fled through the backyard, Ethan carrying Thomas and the girls following in silence, he couldn't help but think of the irony of the situation. He was fleeing through the backyards of Oakhaven like a criminal, when in fact he was trying to expose the real criminals who had destroyed multiple families in the name of greed. The walk to the church took almost an hour, winding through alleys and side streets to avoid the main avenues where Oscar and his men might be searching. When they finally reached the Gothic building of St. Paul's Church, the sun was already rising over the city, painting the sky in pink hues that contrasted with the grim urgency of their situation. Pastor Heinrich Müller, a tall, thin man of 55, was sweeping the front of the church when he saw them approaching. His kind eyes immediately recognized the girls, and he opened his arms to welcome them. "Isabella, Maya, my goodness, are you all right? I was so worried." "Pastor Heinrich," Isabella said, running to hug him, "we need to hide. There are very bad people looking for us." The pastor looked at Ethan, quickly assessing the situation. "Come in, let's talk in my office." As they walked through the silent interior of the church, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were finally finding true allies. But he also knew that time was running out, and that soon they would have to make definitive decisions on how to confront Carmen Sterling and her criminal scheme. Pastor Heinrich's office was a haven of tranquility amidst the chaos that Ethan's and the children's lives had become. Walls lined with books in German and English, a solid oak desk, and the gentle scent of incense created an atmosphere that invited trust. Heinrich prepared chamomile tea as he listened intently to Ethan's account of the events of the past 48 hours. "Carmen Sterling," the pastor murmured, shaking his head slowly. "I had hoped she would find redemption over the years, but it seems she has chosen an even darker path." "Pastor, do you know her story?" Ethan asked. "I do. She attended our church when she was young, shortly after arriving from Pittsburgh. There was something in her, a deep bitterness she carried like an open wound. I tried to help her several times, but she rejected any form of spiritual guidance." Maya was sitting on the floor, quietly playing with Thomas. But Ethan noticed she was paying attention to every word of the conversation. Her ability to absorb information continued to impress him. "Heinrich," Ethan said, "we need a plan. We can't keep running forever, and these children deserve a normal life." "I agree, but confronting someone with the power and resources of Carmen Sterling requires more than just evidence. We need influential allies in the community." Isabella approached the desk where the men were talking. "Pastor Heinrich, I've heard Mrs. Sterling on the phone several times talking about important people in town who owed her favors. Politicians, businessmen, even people from the church." "What kind of favors?" "She would lend them money when they were in trouble, but always demanded things in return. Not just money, but votes on important decisions, information about competitors, that sort of thing." Heinrich frowned. "That would explain how she managed to grow so quickly in business. Carmen created a web of dependency where many people became indebted to her. But that also means she has many enemies," Ethan observed. "People who would like to free themselves from that dependency." "Exactly, and I might know some of those people." At that moment, urgent knocks echoed at the main church door. Heinrich stood up quickly, asking everyone to remain silent in the office. They heard male voices in the church nave, speaking to the pastor in tones that gradually became more aggressive. "We're looking for 2 girls and a baby," said a voice Ethan recognized as Oscar's. "We have information they might be hiding in religious institutions in the city." "I'm sorry," Heinrich replied calmly, "but I can't help you." If there are children in danger, I suggest you contact the proper authorities. We are the proper authorities. I'm a county social worker. Then you won't mind showing me your official identification and a warrant authorizing a search of religious property. The silence that followed was tense. After a few minutes, they heard footsteps retreating and the sound of the main door closing. Heinrich returned to the office with a worried expression. They didn't have proper documentation, but that doesn't mean they won't come back with reinforcements. We need to act quickly, Ethan said. Heinrich, who are these people who could help us against Carmen? There's one man in particular, Klaus Richter, owner of one of the largest breweries in the city. Carmen helped him a few years ago when he was on the brink of bankruptcy, but the price he paid was too high. He has confided in me that he would like to find a way to break free from her influence. How could he help us? Klaus has contacts all over the city, including journalists and people in the justice system. If we can prove that Carmen is involved in crimes, he can ensure the information reaches the right people. Maya got up from the floor, joining the conversation. I know where Mrs. Sterling keeps the most important papers. It's not just in her home office. She has a safe hidden in the brewery. Everyone looked at the girl in surprise. In the brewery? Heinrich asked. Yes, Mr. Klaus lets her use a room promotion in the back to store important things. I saw it when Isabella had to take some papers there once. Isabella confirmed with a nod. It's true. Mrs. Sterling said it was safer than keeping everything at home. She has a special key and goes there at the end of every month. Heinrich stood up, walking to the window to watch the street. Today is October 28th. If her pattern holds, she should be going to the brewery in the next few days. What are you thinking? Ethan asked. I'm thinking it might be time for Klaus Richter to find out exactly what Carmen Sterling is storing on his property. The conversation was interrupted by a soft cry from Thomas. Isabella picked him up, rocking him automatically. Seeing the scene, Heinrich smiled sadly. This baby should be growing up in a safe home, not running from criminals. We will solve this. Pastor, Ethan said hesitantly, are you sure Klaus Richter will help us if Carmen finds out he's conspiring against her? Klaus has more to gain than to lose. Besides, there's something you don't yet know about his situation. What? His son, Julian, is involved in this story in a much deeper way than you imagine. Ethan's heart sped up. Julian Richter? Thomas's father? Exactly. Klaus doesn't know he has a grandson, but when he finds out, I'm sure he'll move heaven and earth to protect this family. Isabella held Thomas closer to her chest. Julian really wants to take responsibility for the baby, but he's afraid of his father's and grandmother's reaction. Then it's time for him to be brave, Heinrich said firmly. And it's time for his father to find out what kind of woman Carmen Sterling really is. Heinrich picked up the old telephone on his desk. I'm going to call Klaus now. It's a risk, but we can't continue in this situation indefinitely. As the pastor dialed the number, Maya approached Ethan. Mr. Ethan, I remember something important about the papers at the brewery. What do you remember? There were papers with your name and pictures of your house, but there were also papers about other families, many families. The rich woman didn't just hurt you. The revelation hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. The scheme was even bigger than he had imagined. Carmen hadn't just destroyed the Vance family for personal revenge. She had turned the destruction of families into a systematic business. Heinrich, he said urgently, it's not just about us. Carmen may have ruined dozens of families over the years. The pastor paused with the phone in his hand, processing the information. If that's true, we have an even greater moral responsibility to stop her. The call was answered quickly. Klaus, this is Heinrich Müller. I need to speak with you urgently about a matter involving your son Julian and Carmen Sterling. Yes, it's very serious. No, I can't talk over the phone. Can you come to the church now? After hanging up, Heinrich turned to the group. He'll be here in 20 minutes, and from his reaction on the phone, he already suspected something was wrong. While they waited, Ethan watched Isabella care for Thomas with so much love and dedication. Maya played quietly in the corner, but her eyes remained alert, always vigilant. These children had been through traumas that would mark their lives forever, yet they still showed a strength and unity that moved him deeply. "Heinrich," he said, "regardless of what happens with Carmen, I want to officially adopt these girls. They deserve a real family." The pastor smiled. "I'm sure they would like that very much. But first, let's make sure they have a safe future to live in." The sound of a car parking outside announced the arrival of Klaus Richter. The moment of truth had arrived, and everyone knew that the next few hours would determine whether they could finally expose Carmen Sterling or if they would be forced to flee once more. Klaus Richter entered the church with heavy steps that echoed through the silent nave. At 52, he maintained the imposing posture typical of successful German-American businessmen, but there was something in his eyes that revealed the weight of the worries he carried. His graying hair was disheveled, as if he had left home in a hurry, and his casual clothes contrasted with the usual elegance of his public appearances. "Heinrich," he said, greeting the pastor with a firm handshake, "your call left me very worried. What's happening with Julian?" Pastor Heinrich led Klaus to his office, where Ethan waited nervously with the 3 children. When Klaus saw Isabella holding Thomas, his face visibly paled. There was something about the scene that struck a sensitive chord in his memory. "Klaus," Heinrich said gently, "I need you to sit down before we talk." "Heinrich, who are these people? Why is there a baby here?" Ethan stood up, extending his hand to Klaus. "Mr. Richter, my name is Ethan Vance. I believe you know my family." Klaus shook his hand mechanically, still processing the situation. "Vance, the construction company. Yes, I heard about the financial troubles. I'm very sorry." "Thank you. Mr. Richter, what I'm about to tell you may be shocking, but your family is deeply involved in this situation." Klaus sat down slowly in the chair Heinrich had offered. "Go on." Isabella approached, holding Thomas so that Klaus could clearly see the baby's face. "Mr. Klaus, this is Thomas. He is Julian's son." The silence that followed was deafening. Klaus stared at the baby for a long moment, then looked at Isabella, then back at Thomas. The resemblance to Julian as a newborn was undeniable. The same light eyes, the same nose shape, the same serene expression in his sleep. "Julian's son," he repeated in a low voice. "How? When? Who are you?" "My name is Isabella Sanders. Julian and I met a few months ago. He used to help me when I lived on the street with my little sister." Klaus ran his hands over his face, trying to process the information. "Julian never told me about a relationship." "Because Mrs. Carmen forbade him from talking," Maya said suddenly, her voice small but clear. "She said she would kick him out of the house if he admitted he liked a poor girl." "Carmen?" Klaus straightened in his chair, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm. "Carmen Sterling is involved in this?" Heinrich leaned forward. "Klaus, there's much more going on than you imagine. Carmen isn't just controlling your son, she's destroying entire families all over the city." Ethan began to recount the events of the past weeks, from Maya's appearance at his cabin to the discovery of the scheme of forged documents and illegal adoptions. Klaus listened in growing silence, his expression darkening with each revelation. "The contracts that ruined my construction company," Ethan said, "were drawn up by Robert Shaw under Carmen's direction. But according to Maya, who witnessed several conversations, your brewery was also a target of similar manipulation." "What do you mean?" Maya approached Klaus, staring at him with those large, Intelligent eyes. Do you remember when you almost lost the brewery 3 years ago, when the banks wanted to take everything? Klaus nodded slowly. That was when Carmen helped me with a loan to save the company. She didn't help, Maya said simply. She made it all happen. I heard her talking to the bald man about how they were going to make you owe her a favor forever. Klaus's face turned red with anger. Are you saying Carmen orchestrated my company's financial crisis? Robert Shaw manipulated your supply contracts, Ethan confirmed. The same method they used on us. They created problems to then offer solutions that left them in a position of control. Klaus stood up abruptly, starting to pace the small office. That would explain a lot. For the last 3 years, Carmen has been making increasingly absurd demands in exchange for maintaining our partnership. Decisions about the brewery that should be mine, she practically imposes. And now she's trying to control even your son's personal life, Isabella added. She wants Thomas to disappear so no one knows Julian was involved with me. Klaus stopped pacing and looked at the baby again. My grandson, he murmured. I have a grandson, and I didn't know. Heinrich stood up and placed a hand on Klaus's shoulder. The question now is, what are you going to do with this information? I'm going to end this woman, Klaus said with cold determination. But we need concrete proof. We can't act based on testimony alone. There is proof, Maya said. In your brewery, Mrs. Carmen keeps important papers in a room in the back. Klaus frowned. A room in the back? There's no room in the back that I've authorized her to use. Yes, there is, Isabella insisted. A small room, near where the big barrels are. She has the key and goes there at the end of every month to check the papers. Are you saying Carmen is using my property to store evidence of her crimes? Exactly, Ethan confirmed. And if we can get access to those documents... Klaus took his cell phone from his pocket. I'm calling Julian now. If he's involved in this situation, he needs to choose which side he's on. The call was answered quickly. Julian, it's me. I need you to come to St. Paul's Church immediately. No, I can't explain over the phone. Yes, it's about Carmen. And Julian, bring the keys to all the rooms in the brewery. All of them. While they waited for Julian to arrive, Klaus held Thomas for the first time. The baby opened his light eyes and looked directly at his grandfather, as if instinctively recognizing the kinship between them. He's beautiful, Klaus said emotionally. He has the Richter family's eyes. He'll have a good life, Isabella promised, even if I have to raise him alone. You won't raise him alone, Klaus said firmly. If Julian doesn't take his responsibilities as a man, I will as a grandfather. This child is my family. Maya tugged on Klaus's shirt sleeve. Mr. Klaus, there's something you need to know about Mrs. Carmen before your son gets here. What? She said once that if you found out about the baby, she would tell everyone you steal money from the brewery. She has fake papers that prove it. Klaus closed his eyes, breathing deeply. Blackmail. Of course she prepared a defense in case I found out the truth. But now we know, Ethan said, and we can prepare for it. Day, the sound of rapid footsteps in the church nave announced Julian's arrival. The 19-year-old entered the office clearly agitated, his blonde hair disheveled and his eyes red as if he hadn't slept in days. Dad? What's going on? Why? Julian stopped mid-sentence when he saw Isabella holding Thomas. His face went through a rapid sequence of emotions: surprise, relief, fear, and finally, determination. Isabella, how did you get here? I thought that your grandmother had managed to separate us forever, Isabella said sadly. Klaus stood up, positioning himself between his son and the door. Julian, we have a lot to talk about, and this time I want the whole truth. The young man looked at the people in the office, then at the baby in Isabella's arms. Dad, I wanted to tell you sooner, but Grandma said a lot of things, apparently. Klaus interrupted. "But now I want to hear what you have to say, starting with explaining why there are criminal documents being stored in my brewery." Julian paled. "You know about that. I know now. The question is, are you also involved in her schemes, or are you just another victim?" The young man looked at Isabella, then at his son in her arms, and made a decision that would change everything. "Dad," he said in a firm voice, "I'm going to tell you everything I know. But first, I want you to know that I love Isabella, and I want to claim our son, whatever it costs." Julian's confession revealed the full extent of Carmen Sterling's criminal enterprise. For 2 hours, the young man recounted how he had been manipulated by his grandmother to spy on his father's business dealings, how she had forced him to cut contact with Isabella when she discovered their relationship, and most importantly, how she planned to use Thomas as a bargaining chip if Klaus ever tried to rebel against her control. "She has a laptop where she notes everything about the people she needs to control," Julian said, his hands trembling as he held the keys to the brewery. "Names, weaknesses, family secrets. It's like a blackmail archive." Klaus listened to it all in silence, his anger growing with each revelation. When Julian finished, the businessman stood up with iron-willed determination. "We're going to the brewery now. If Carmen is using my property to store evidence, it's time we find out exactly what she's been doing." The Richter Brewery was in Oakhaven's industrial district, a complex of red brick buildings that had been in operation for 3 generations. It was almost noon when the group arrived, using 2 cars to avoid attracting attention. Klaus had asked the employees to leave early, claiming technical issues needed to be resolved. Julian led them to the old part of the building, where huge oak barrels were aging the craft beer that had made the company famous. At the back of the warehouse, almost hidden behind a pile of empty crates, was a door that Klaus swore he had never noticed before. "Here," Julian said, inserting a small, golden key into the lock. "She always came alone, but once I followed her and saw where she kept the papers." The room was small and windowless, lit only by a fluorescent bulb that flickered intermittently. There was a metal cabinet against the wall, a few old chairs, and, surprisingly, a modern computer connected to a printer. On the desk, piles of documents were organized into folders with labels that made Ethan's blood run cold. Vance, Sanders, Müller, Hoffman. Dozens of traditional German surnames from the city. "My God," Klaus muttered, picking up one of the folders. She was systematically targeting the oldest families in Oakhaven. Meyer approached the computer, which was on and displaying a complex spreadsheet. "It's just like what I saw in her office at home. It has names, dates, and numbers." Dr. Wagner, who had arrived moments later with equipment to photograph the evidence, examined the spreadsheet over the girl's shoulder. "This is a detailed record of criminal operations, property values, dates of document forgery, profit percentages." Ethan opened the folder with his family's name, finding copies of the fraudulent contracts that had destroyed his construction company, along with photographs of his house and handwritten notes detailing the strategy to force the property's sale. "Here it is," he said in a shaky voice. "The proof that everything was planned." Carmen even noted the specific dates when Robert Shaw was supposed to present the problematic contracts. Klaus found his own folder, confirming that his brewery's financial crisis had been artificially created. There were documents proving that Robert Shaw had bribed suppliers to cancel contracts at strategic moments, forcing Klaus to accept Carmen's loan. Isabella found something even more disturbing, a folder labeled Orphan Project, containing lists of vulnerable children, including names, ages, and assessments of their potential usefulness. She was cataloging orphan children, Isabella said, horrified, as if they were merchandise. Pastor Heinrich, who was examining religious documents, found evidence that Carmen had infiltrated several churches in the city to identify families in distress. She was using confidential information that people shared during pastoral counseling, he said indignantly. Maya, who was still studying the computer with her typical concentration, suddenly caught everyone's attention. "There's a file open here. It's called Final Elimination." Dr. Wagner quickly approached the screen. The document was a detailed timeline for the next 6 months, including plans to force 12 more families into bankruptcy and a specific section titled Resolution of the Richter Problem. "She was planning to destroy us completely," Klaus said, reading over the lawyer's shoulder. "It says here that after taking full control of the brewery, she would finalize the cleansing of traditional German families to modernize the city's socio-economic profile. The plan was even more ambitious and sinister than anyone had imagined. Carmen wasn't just seeking personal revenge or financial gain. She wanted to completely reshape the social structure of Oakhaven, eliminating the German-origin families she had blamed for her social exclusion decades ago. Ethan systematically photographed all the documents while Dr. Wagner made legal notes. They had enough evidence to not only prove the crimes already committed, but also to prevent the future attacks planned by Carmen. "We need to act quickly," Wagner said. "If Carmen finds out we've found this hiding place." At that moment, the sound of cars arriving outside made everyone freeze. Through a crack in the wall, Klaus saw 2 black sedans parking in front of the brewery. "It's her," Julian whispered. "I recognize Grandma's car." "How did she know we were here?" Ethan asked. "Because I told her," said a familiar voice behind them. Everyone turned to see Robert Shaw standing in the doorway of the secret room, holding a cell phone. Behind him, Oscar and 2 unknown men blocked the only exit. "Robert Shaw," Klaus said with contempt. "I should have known you'd be here." "Klaus! Klaus!" Robert said, shaking his head. "You were always too naive for the business world. Did you really think you could challenge Mrs. Sterling without consequences?" "This evidence will be handed over to the authorities," Dr. Wagner said firmly. "You can't stop justice." "Yes, we can," Oscar said, "because officially you are trespassing on private property and trying to steal confidential documents. I have a seizure warrant here that authorizes us to recover all materials." Dr. Wagner examined the document Oscar handed him. "This is a fake. The judge's signature is clearly forged." "Prove it in court," Robert said with a cruel smile, "if you can get there." It was at that moment that Maya did something unexpected. Taking advantage of everyone's focus on the argument between the adults, she quickly typed something on the computer and pressed a sequence of keys. "What are you doing, girl?" Oscar shouted. "Emailing everything," she said calmly, "to Pastor Heinrich, to Dr. Wagner, to Mr. Klaus, and to 10 other people on the computer's contact list." Robert rushed to the computer, but it was too late. The screen showed messages sent successfully, and Maya had managed to send not only the photographed documents, but also a copy of the entire Final Elimination file. The chaos that followed lasted only a few minutes. Klaus took advantage of the distraction to activate a silent alarm that alerted the police to a break-in at the brewery. Dr. Wagner protected the children, while Ethan and Julian physically confronted Oscar and his men, preventing them from destroying more evidence. When the police sirens echoed through the area, Robert and Oscar tried to flee, but the evidence was already safe in multiple digital copies spread across the city. 6 months later, during a Christmas celebration at St. Paul's Church, Ethan watched Maya and Isabella playing with Thomas, who could already sit up on his own and smile at anyone who approached. The legal case against Carmen Sterling had resulted in her imprisonment and the recovery of most of the stolen properties from Oakhaven's families. Klaus had made Julian a partner in the brewery and helped Isabella finish her studies through a special program for at-risk youth. The brewery now sponsored a social project that helped needy families in the city, managed by Pastor Heinrich. Ethan had managed to rebuild Vance construction on ethical foundations, specializing in historic preservation. His first major project was the renovation of the old Sanders family home, which he transformed into a community center for orphaned children. Dr. Wagner was finalizing Maya's adoption papers. She had specifically asked to keep the Sanders last name, to never forget my parents, but also to be Mr. Ethan's daughter. "Maya," Ethan said, kneeling beside the girl who was drawing birds in a new notebook, "you saved not just our family, but the whole city." "I just remembered the things I saw," she said simply. "Isabella always said our memory is a gift we should use to help people." On that Christmas night, as snow began to fall softly over Oakhaven, 4 people who had been strangers 8 months ago celebrated as a true family. Ethan had discovered that wealth didn't come from land or buildings, but from the courage to protect those we love and the determination to fight against injustice, no matter how powerful the opponents. Maya continued to draw her birds, but now they weren't flying away to escape. They were flying free because they knew they would always have a safe nest to return to. If you liked this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story, giving it a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.